everybody. This is Rebecca Olkowski with babyboomster.com. And today I'm interviewing Dr. Andrea Slominski, who is an author, speaker, and coach who helps women 45 plus navigate the rough seas of menopause and midlife, which we all know about. She has her MA and Ph.D. in mythological studies and depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute and is a 5-time Joseph Campbell Mythology Studies Scholarship Award winner. It's quite a mouthful. Anyway, welcome, Andrea.
Well, thank you for having me, Rebecca. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about what you do, just kind of an overall idea of what it is.
Sure. Basically, I guess you could call me a woman's midlife, perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, those sort of 25 years of change coach. Went back to school when I was in my 50s and studied the transition for women in midlife, which is the psychological shift, and then also studied the menopause, perimenopause, postmenopause shift. Basically looked at it through a completely different perspective, which is a mythological perspective, using fairy tale, myth, folktale, personal narrative to help people navigate through a lot of these changes, which can be really difficult. And I identified basically a triple transformation that we go through. And sometimes women will hear about one thing, but not another.
Mm-hmm.
And we go through a triple transformation that one is physical, obviously, one is psychological, and then those two together weave together to form often or usually a spiritual transformation of some sort in the way that women look at their lives for meaning, purpose, and belonging. And so there's so many changes that happen between the midlife shift and the menopause shift that approaching it differently through story and through narrative and through personal experience and through the great tales gives us an opportunity to look at what we're going through from an overview rather than being buried by it, right? And so it gives us a chance to build a new perspective and get some wisdom from, all the women who've lived for millennia, before us.
That's an interesting way to go through that. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of that. So what is like the new life stage that's emerged for women?
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a really interesting one that I'm not the first person to talk about it, but for me, it was a discovery when I was researching. Basically, since 1900, okay, women's lifespans have expanded by 1/3 for white women or doubled for women of color. In 1900, white women statistically were dead by 51, and women of color were dead by 43. So our lives have expanded to include what I call Regency, or an entirely new life stage from, say, 45 to 70 plus, because we're the first generation of women, boomers, late boomers, and all the women coming up behind us, to live past menopause together as a cohort, as a group, in the history of humanity.
Wow.
We are the first. So we're the first generation to live past menopause together. And so it's created this entirely new life stage for which there are no maps, no models, no guideposts, no road signs to tell us how we should strive to learn, develop, and live our most authentic and fulfilled lives in a life stage that, historically speaking, women never had.
Yeah, I could imagine that. They were really considered to be really old and elderly at probably like 55 or something.
Yeah, since the time of Plato, I mean, menopause has been known for thousands of years. And there have always been old women who lived to a ripe old age in their family, or who were maybe the witch at the edge of the, medieval village, right? Who lived, to in her 80s or 90s or whatever, but never before as an entire generation. So people are so surprised. You see people now, like Oprah's talking about, menopause and the perimenopause shift. The other one, oh gosh, I forget what her name is. these women are coming out, yeah, and a lot of other celebrities as well are coming out and talking about, you know, aging into authenticity. You look at people like Helen Mirren, you look at people like Jane Fonda as examples. Certainly looking at celebrities and people who are in the public eye, who have a huge income or whatever, they certainly have a lot of options that most regular women like you and I don't have in terms of, you know, upkeep, you know, from diet and exercise and skincare and, you know, plastic surgery if they decide to go that route,
especially, yeah,
or whatever they do. The opportunity within Regency for women is absolutely huge, because basically at the time that we hit menopause or go through menopause, on the average about 50 years old, generally we may have reached a glass ceiling in our career, or we may have reached a point where we're at the end of one career and we're thinking, well, I'm not ready to retire, but I don't know what I want to do. I want to do something new. Or if we raise children, we might have empty nest, or we might have boomerang children that have left and come back. But there's so much opportunity, and it's a time when we come out of the householder years and we've spent 20 or 30 years tending everybody else's garden, right? And now it's time for us to say, now we say, hey, it's my turn, right? Now I've come to this point in my life where I can focus on me, where I can take this new life stage, Regency, and I can reclaim my life, and I can reclaim my sovereignty, and I can discover who I am now, what's important to me now, what, you know, where do I find my meaning? What do I want my purpose to be? Where do I belong? It's interesting because Regency has so much opportunity for women, but we also live in a patriarchal culture that denigrates and does not value aging women.
right.
So there's two sides of that coin. So we're really living in a incredibly dynamic time for women's life stages, longevity, psychology, physiology, all the different breakthroughs and things that are going on in the ways that women manage, you know, their menopause and their perimenopause symptoms. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of opportunity. Yeah, a lot of change. So that's what I do, is I help people who, you know, have hit a bump in the road, so to speak.
I love that term, Regency. I mean, it just sounds so regal.
Well, thank
Obviously.
you. I mean, a lot of, I'm not the first one to talk about this stage. There's a lot of female psychotherapists and writers and scholars have been talking about this for a while, and some of them call it the stage of the queen. But I don't feel very much like a queen. I still have to do my own laundry. I have to do my own cooking. I'm not independently wealthy. I don't have a million people waiting on me. I am not free to travel and do whatever I want whenever I want. So queen just didn't really fit for me. And I really thought regent was an interesting phrase or term, because a regent is someone who rules in place of someone who hasn't come yet, right?
Right, yeah.
Ruler, it might be a prince or a princess who's not old enough to rule, who still has to grow up or whatever. And I feel like as a regent, we can make decisions for ourselves. We can claim our sovereignty. We can make choices. We can decide who we are, what we want to do, who we're going to become. And that as a regent, we hold that seat of power for our wise women to come. So we're actually filling the regent seat and holding it for ourselves as we age into the next stage, which would be then wise woman, or the traditional term of crone. So I really just like the idea of regency.
So regency's first, and then you move into wise women. Is that?
Well, mythologically speaking, in terms of looking at women's life stages metaphorically, traditionally in ancient religion and also and mythology, but also really in the 40s and 50s and 60s, this became really popular, was to think of a woman's lifespan in terms of maiden, mother, and crone, right? The triple goddess of maiden, mother, and crone. And in my dissertation, what I argued was that women are now living past menopause, and so we're living longer, and we've created a new life stage. So because the metaphoric idea of the goddess always represents the lives of the women, not the women representing the goddess, if our lives have expanded into 4, then the goddess must also, that as a metaphor, have expanded into 4. So I call it maiden, householder, which I think is more inclusive than mother, because there are a lot of women who choose not to have children. There are a lot of women who live alternative
Especially.
lifestyles, right? Or you
Hmm.
can mother your friends, you can take care of your aging parents, you can mother your career,
Your
you
dog.
can put kind of energy into a lot of things, you know,
Yeah.
and not everyone has kids. So I call that householder. So maiden, householder, and then regent, right? And then wise woman. And those are the
I,
four.
I like that. I like that. And I think the reason too is that, women weren't living through pregnancies before. So, the people that were having babies didn't always survive. And then now there's so many people that I know that never had children and they just chose to not have them. So yeah, they they don't have to, there's probably less stress and things like that helps them to live a little bit longer.
Well, it's different people make different, lifestyle choices, and
Hmm.
there's a cost benefit analysis to everything, whether
Right.
it's having children or not having children, focusing on your career or not focusing on your career. And
Yeah.
whatever women choose to do is, in terms of, following their passion and their authenticity, is fantastic.
Reinvention is a big thing because when you do live longer, you have to be able to sustain yourself longer also,
Mhm.
especially if you're losing spouses and, things like that are happening.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of research going on now into the future of work, and
Hmm.
saying that, the careers are now going to be 60 years long, right? And that
Hmm.
that people are going to shift into, more different fields and different careers, instead of focusing on one career for an entire life, that there's going to be a lot more change and growth and metamorphosis, like, throughout a person's career life. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what develops. But my work, in helping women at this time of life is helping them reclaim their sort of pre-marriage, pre-partner, pre-career, their who they were originally before they had other commitments, and what their passions were and what they were interested in, and helping people reclaim their sort of sovereignty in their one in selfness, and say, okay, who am I now, outside of my family, outside of my work, outside of my friends? Who am I now, and who do I want to become? What
Yeah.
passions do I have now? What excites me now? And also, the midlife shift makes people realize, a lot of women realize for the first time, that they don't have an unlimited number of do-overs left in their
Hmm.
lives. And they think about, okay, well, what do I want my legacy to be? What do I think is important now? What issues or ideas do I want to focus my energy on, in order to contribute to the collective, solve any particular problems, work, within culture to achieve something, whatever it is that they want to do. And some women just want to go home and garden. Some want to take care of their grandchildren. Some want to start a new business. Some want to run for political office. I mean,
Hmm.
the variety is enormous. But what happens at this time of life, when we hit the menopause shift and the midlife shift simultaneously, right?
Hmm.
um, it really brings up so many things in women's lives, in their psyches, in their heart, in their goals. And it's a rough terrain to navigate. I mean, we go through the triple transformation, and we go through 7 realms of change in the way
Uh-huh.
that we think about our lives. We go through our body, right? Our self-image, our feelings, right? Our
Hmm.
needs, our priorities, and our goals all shift during this period of time. And the funny thing is that, or it's miraculous or challenging, whatever way you want to look at it, is that Regency, from, like, say 45 to 70 or 70 plus, is 25 years. And you'll
Hmm.
change as much during those 25 years as you did in your first 25 years. But for your first 25 years, from when you're born to when you're 25, most of your growth markers are physical. How are they growing? Are they meeting the height and weight charts? How are they doing with learning? Are they meeting all these different things? How's their brain growing? Is everything going well? And then you hit 25, approximately, you're out in the world, you're starting your career. And then in Regency, it's not about physical growth anymore. It's the 25 years is about soul growth. It's really about going deeper. It's about returning to yourself and rediscovering who you are and what you want to do and who you want to become.
That's really cool. Can you explain more what the triple transformation is that women go through?
Sure. Well, the first one is physical because we go through the perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause shift. And in that physical transformation, a lot of things happen. And it starts with the changing of the hormone cascade, right? The estrogen and progesterone cascade. And then through that, when perimenopause starts and our estrogen levels start to fluctuate, that's when we get all of the indicators that we're in perimenopause, which can be everything from hot flashes to mood swings to
chin hairs.
Chin hairs, yes, irregular menstruation, weight gain, change in the skin, change in all these, and the list goes on. I could list, hundreds of different, indicators that women have shared with me that they experienced. The rise of anger, the rise of discontent, all these different things. And then at the same time as all these shifts are going on, we hit the psychological shift, the shift in the psyche of going from, our householder years, our busy, crazy time with our families and our careers, and we hit midlife. And the midlife psychological shift is pre-programmed into the psyche the same way that perimenopause is pre-programmed into the body. And this is something that a lot of people don't learn about, have never been told. It's not really talked about. People say, oh, midlife crisis. Like one year they'll say, oh, yes, everybody has a midlife crisis. Then psychologists and psychotherapists 5 years later will say, well, now we don't know really if there's such a thing as a midlife crisis. And then like just even this past year, there was an article in the New York Times saying, well, now we think maybe there is in fact a midlife crisis. And it's not so much about whether there's a crisis or not, but there's a huge shift internally, which basically prompts you to take assessment of your life, of all aspects of your life. And sometimes it can show up as like you wake up one morning or you sit at the table after dinner and everybody's run off to do their thing and you're sitting there and there's a ton of dishes or whatever it is. And you say, oh my gosh, is this all there is? Or you get up in the morning and you're sitting in traffic and you're rushing to work again. And that thought comes to you of like, is this it? Like, I thought maybe I'd have more of this by now, or I'd feel more like that, or I'd have accomplished this, or this. Like,
oh yeah, I can feel that.
Right. By this point. Right. And then, or you say, geez, I don't know. I just feel like, I feel like, my life that felt so great and felt like everything was going great and was wonderful last week now feels like clothes that don't fit. Now feels like shoes that are too tight. Or was I at the airport when my ship came in at the port, and did I miss something, right? Have I missed something?
Yeah.
And so people can feel that way. They can look, wake up one morning and feel as if, their needs are not being met. They're not being heard. Their boundaries aren't being respected. They're not like an honored part of whatever it is, whether it's in the career, with colleagues, with advancement, whether it's in relationships or family. It's really a time when a lot of people wake up and say, okay, what am I doing? Is this meaningful to me anymore? People can make big decisions and make huge career shifts, like leave their career and start a business, leave a career and start a nonprofit, or whatever it is that they wake up and say, this doesn't hold meaning for me anymore. I need to do something else. And so the reassessment of the meaning, purpose, and belonging in our lives, it's not something that happens overnight. Like the midlife shift is something that happens and that we go through it, and everybody goes through it differently. Every woman is unique, and every woman goes through the perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause, and midlife shift individually. And so as much as we'd like to leave road signs and mile markers and maps for people to follow behind us. We really have to create our own, because each woman's experience is unique as we move through this. And so as all of these changes are happening to us physically, and the shift of our hormonal cascade, right? Not just estrogen, but testosterone and progesterone, and the whole cascade shifts. That can also bring up old repressed anger, repressed frustration, different things that we've sort of held at bay during our life in order to get things done, in order for things to run smoothly. And so the changing in the hormones can change our emotional perspective on our lives as well. And the midlife shift changes our emotional perspective on our life. So there's a lot that's going on in this time, and what's happening physically influences what's happening to us in our psyche, in our emotions, in our mind, and vice versa. So those two together then, oftentimes, or usually in the women that I work with, create what I call the third transformation, which is the spiritual shift, which is the deep searching for personal meaning. Right? The deep searching for, what is this all about? What does this mean? Who am I? What's the meaning of life? What is it I'm supposed to do? Did I find what I was supposed to do? You know, am I fulfilling what is really authentically me? Right? And it's going to make me feel like I'm living my, you know, my true soul life, that I'm being true to my psyche, my inner self. So that happens also at the same time. So, and this goes on for years. You know, people want to say, oh, well, you know, I was through midlife, or I was through menopause in 5 years. Well, that's great. But actually, if you hit menopause and then you go into the postmenopause period, it can take 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years until you hit your new hormonal profile.
I didn't have a bad menopause, but I can definitely feel that, you know, there's always something coming up, or some weird feeling of being hot, or, you know, just odd stuff going on, but just out of the blue, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the triple shift. And then within that, our self-image, our perspective, you know, has those 7, I call them 7 realms of change, because each of them is like its own little sea that we have to navigate across, right? And some women will have a harder time in others, and some women, you know, will have an easier time in others. It just depends on, you know, who you are and your specific goals and dreams and situation and life choices and challenges and blessings. So it's a really individual process.
So what are the 7 realms of change?
Well, the 7 realms of change are your changing body, right? You're changing self-image.
Okay.
You're changing feelings. You're changing needs. You're changing priorities. And you're changing goals.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And they all interact together like this. I'll show you. This is the 7 realms of change journal that I use in the class that I teach on the 7 realms. And so they all overlap. Right? They all overlap. And so you can't be dealing with one of these without being connected to all the other 7 in the way that going through this time of life fundamentally changes, you know, if we're awake, right? If we're conscious, if we're paying attention, if we want to dive into the difficult issues of meaning, purpose, and belonging, if we want to go into the reassessment. Some people don't. Some people don't, and that's okay. You know, everybody has to live their life their own way. But for women who are really looking to find a way to understand their story, right? And how they have arrived at where they are, right? And understand exactly where they are in their journey, be able to look back and say, okay, I can clearly see now how I got here. And then we turn around and we say, okay, where do you want to go? Right. And we create maps and guides and action plans for whatever it is that any particular woman wants to achieve.
That's incredible. Yeah. I'm curious to find out about what this mythological aspect is in the way that you deal with it.
Well, it depends on each woman's particular issues that she's dealing with. But
Mm-hmm.
mythologies are really interesting. They're stories that never happened, but are always true.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different world mythologies, and there's so many different examples.
And
But
there's a lot of them are similar in different parts.
yes, yeah, because the mythologies grew out of the human desire to make order and understanding out of the world that they were living in.
Mm-hmm.
So one good example that I could give you briefly is if a woman is having troubles with empty nest, let's put it that way. Let's say
Mm-hmm.
she's, her last child has left the nest, or her only child has left the nest, and she's feeling lost, and she's not quite sure how to get over it, or how to move through it, or what to do about it. One of the myths that I use a lot helping women with that is the myth of Demeter and Persephone. And in this myth, it works well for mothers, and it works well for daughters, and it works well for any woman who is in relationship, right, with a mother or with a
Mm-hmm.
daughter, because you can look at the myth from this side or from this side, right, the mother's side or the daughter's side. And in the myth, Demeter is the goddess of all the growing things in the grain in the earth, and she makes everything grow, and she makes all the grain come to fruit, so that there can be a great harvest, and all the animals can be fed, and all the people can be fed, and all the offerings can be made to the gods. And she has a daughter, Persephone, who's young, beautiful, virgin girl. And she's out in a meadow one day, and she's picking flowers with her friends. And all of a sudden, the ground opens up, and Hades, the king, the god of the underworld, right, abducts her and takes her back to the underworld with him to be her queen. Well,
Mm-hmm.
she's like screaming all the way because she's being abducted. And there's all kinds of, great art pieces and classical art that have been, created based on this myth.
True,
Um,
yeah.
and she's taken to the underworld, and she is, crying for her mother as she's being abducted. And Demeter hears her, but can't find her. And so
Mm-hmm.
she's seeking and seeking for her daughter. She doesn't know what happened. To make a long story short, there's a lot of different nuances to the myth, but to just cut it short, to make a long story short, Demeter basically grieves for the loss of her daughter, and is searching for her daughter and can't find her daughter, and ends up absolutely ignoring everything that she's, all of her duties as a goddess, and the earth begins to
Mm-hmm.
die. And she's so bereft from the loss of her daughter that she ends up, sitting on the ground in the middle of the city, throwing ashes on her head, and not, and just willing herself
Hang out. Yeah.
into oblivion. In the end, what ends up happening is she discovers that Zeus has made a deal with Hades that he could have Persephone for his wife without talking to Demeter. So Demeter finds this out and says to Zeus, if you don't return Persephone to me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to not perform my goddess duties, and I'm just going to let the world die, and humanity will die, and everything will die, and you will have no one to worship you, and just dare me, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
well, what happens is Persephone, when she's abducted by Hades, is taken to the underworld, where she's the reluctant bride. And there's what I want to say here is that there's so many ways to interpret myths
Mm-hmm.
psychologically and metaphorically, that there are many different ways that the role of Demeter is interpreted, and there are many different ways the role of Persephone is interpreted, and none of them are particularly wrong or right, but they're really wonderful at being able to tap into the feelings that women or girls are having at this time. And so Persephone now has been separated from her mother, and so she's now growing into becoming an individuated woman. She's wanting to go back to her mother, but when she's in Hades, Hades gets her to eat the seed of a pomegranate, which is symbolic of sexual energy and ripening sexuality. and all those things. So once she's eaten the food of the underworld, right,
Mhm.
she's not allowed to leave. Now she's taking part of the energy of this new life, right, as the bride. And so she's not allowed to then return to the upper world and be with her mother. So Demeter is still petitioning, saying, you have to give me back my daughter. And if you don't, I'm going to let the world die. So they come to an agreement where Persephone can be with her mother for half the year, and she can be with Hades for half the year. And when Persephone returns to her mother, that is spring. Okay. When spring comes, that's when Persephone is returned to her mother, and Demeter and Persephone are reunited, and the world grows again, and everything is bountiful and happy and whatever. And then when the winter comes, Persephone returns to Hades, and that's when everything goes dormant and lies still for the months of the winter. So looking at the idea of empty nest, what we do is we look at the individual woman's situation, her state of mind, the state of her psyche, where she's at, what her emotional state is. And then we talk about the myth and how Demeter deals with being separated from her daughter and the amount of grief, and how the grief basically brings her to the edge of letting everything die around her, letting her vital energy of herself, right, die off, right? And it, through the myth, different things happen with Demeter on her travels, where she is finally restored to herself, and where she comes back to life, fully participating in the mysteries of life and death and birth. And then she and Persephone actually then preside over one of the great Greek mysteries, which was called the Eleusinian mysteries, which was a ritual that occurred where it was 1 year you were initiated, the second year you went into the ritual. And it was so secret that it was never written down what actually happened in the ritual, because you were never supposed to speak of it. But both the mother and the daughter presided as goddesses over this ritual. And the people who went in and then emerged on the other side of the ritual emerged with no fear of death.
Wow.
And so it's a really rich mythology that can be applied to both sides, to the daughters and to the mothers, right? And to all different types of things that we go through in midlife, realizing that, okay, it's the first time we might say, oh, geez, I'm mortal, right?
Yeah.
I don't have endless, I may have fewer years ahead of me than behind me, right? That can be a huge realization. That's one myth that we use, or that I use. The myth of Ariadne and Theseus is another really big myth that I use with women who have been disrespected or abandoned or somehow misused. There's the myth of Psyche and Eros, which is about the interaction of soul and love, and the maturing of love in a relationship. There's so many myths.
Yeah, you can can use
and it
all of
just
them.
depends. Yeah, and it just depends on what any particular woman is struggling with. And each client that I work with in a one-on-one situation, basically, I find myths that resonate with them. Some people love the Celtic mythology, some people love the Nordic mythology, some people love Greek, some people love African, some people love Egyptian. It just depends on what they're drawn to. And all of these mythologies offer metaphors and representations of psychological states that we all live through and suffer through and eventually emerge on the other side of.
That's so cool. I love it. I love it. Well, why don't you tell everybody how they can contact you and what you're offering and things like that?
Oh, sure. Well, you can get in touch with me through my website. I'm sure you'll put it in the link.
I will.
Yeah, it's www.doctor, as in DR, and then my name, Andrea Slominski.com. So look for it in the link so you don't have to try to spell it. I offer one-on-one coaching. I also offer a 8-week class right now, is about to start in June, on the 7 realms of change, right, that women go through. And we go through each of the realms of change, and we talk about what's inside this realm and how the changing ideas of how you deal with your changing body, how you deal with your changing self-image, which of the 7 realms is going to be the most difficult for you, and putting together strategies in order to be able to navigate these realms. And it also teaches skills that you can use for basically the rest of your life in how to work with change in a way that makes it so that you're not always being drowned by it, so that you can look at what's happening in your life and you can use the strategies and the skills and the perspective builders that I teach in the class in order to look at where you are now and where you want to go, and what is it that seems to be hindering you at any particular time. So that's coming up. That you can find that under the classes tab on my website. I'm also teaching a revolving class that starts every 8 weeks. It's a deep dive into Women Who Run with the Wolves, which is a foundational book on women's mythology through folktale and fairy tale by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she's one of my favorite female psychotherapists. She's amazing. We just jump in for 8 weeks and look at 8 different chapters in the book. We don't finish the whole book, but it basically unlocks another way, another perspective at looking at change and reclaiming our authentic self, right? Our wild woman, our wild woman within, our wild woman energy within, our feminine archetypal energy. Once a month or so, I do a Woman's Wisdom Village. It's just a one-night event that's focusing on one particular subject. That's going to be on loving our bodies and ourselves unconditionally.
Are these all online classes or?
Yes, they're all online. Yeah.
Okay,
and
good.
I'm in Santa Clarita. I mean, people can, as you can see, I have a pretty big office. People can come in and we can work here, in one-to-one in person. But like a lot of other people, once COVID hit, there wasn't a lot of in-person work that was going on. So I switched a lot of things to online. So you can book in person or you can book online. You can always reach out to me through the website with my email if you have any questions. Yeah, so I'm out here doing my myth thing.
That sounds so cool. I love it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
I think people are really going to enjoy this.
Well, thank you for inviting me on your show. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to talk about it and just let women know that, that menopause is the beginning of something potentially amazing, and that because we're the first generation in the history of humanity, the first generation of women to have this opportunity. I mean, all of our female ancestors behind us are cheering us on because we have this opportunity to do something that they never had. And so I'm just thrilled to be able to help women discover what that is and move into Regency and claim their sovereignty. That's my thing.
Cool.